Chapter 13. A Clash of Morality. The spread of evil is the symptom of a vacuum. Whenever evil wins, it is only by default, by the moral failure of those who evade the fact that there can be no compromise on basic principles. A quote by Ayn Rand. Taking charge of something has its perks. They tend to blind the ego and judgment of those that are, if they're not reminded and cautious to the flaws. Responsibility can be the true test of leadership, but many scorn it, blaming those that have sworn their fealty to their leader, rather than those in charge taking time to consider their own inputs and judgments. For the context of military operations, a leader may and should really ask themselves if sending specific groups or individuals to do specific jobs have the specific set of skills to do so. Doesn't have to be military, can be everyday life. Would you call a plumber to solve an electrical issue with your fuse box, or a software developer to fix or replace a part in your car? Sounds simple in retrospect. However, in terms of military, it never is. Plans never tend to survive first contact with the enemy, and even less when met with superiors. Decimus was on the receiving end of this wholeheartedly. He did take full responsibility for the operation during his command. However, Eidolon was not there to hear, as he saw it, as excuses to prolong the inevitable, but more of cowardice. What the faithful did not understand was how the loyalists were so self-preserving, when in their oaths involved sacrifice for the greater good of the empire when the time came. Surely it had before the faithful arrived. It had been 3 hours since the arrival of Eidolon. His flagship had still a hold on Decimus, and brought it along to the near orbit of the planet that had housed their adversary. A huge contingent of ships that would accompany such a revered and, depending on who you asked, equally reviled individual of the Orion's highest order of command, known as the High Echelons. The rank of High Echelon came with diplomatic immunity and supreme command over any operation instantly, so long as they were in the operations theatre at the time. The only authority Eidolon had to answer to was himself and Emperor Melitian. No one could contest his authority, and what also kept them in check, his might. In the sanctum of Eidolon, inside the Grand Cathedral on board his flagship, a large round table that doubled as a projector was present at the centre of the room, the dimensions of which were 70 meters across and completely circular. It was more of an atrium in scale than a meeting area, but do consider the size of the potential guests Eidolon would grace with his presence, or require audiences with. It was reasonable. It was well lit, no thanks to the reflective walls of steel and marble, lined with the gold columns and stained glass windows that depicted Eidolon's many deeds, containing as much vanity and boasting that could give Garuda's Rome some competition on displaying ego. Due to the shorter than usual procession, Eidolon, accompanied by Saduge, Bartholomew, Decimus, who was also accompanied by Jarl, had been sat relatively close to each other at one quarter of the humongous table. The 3 leaders were in their armours, whereas Saduge and Jarl were in their uniforms. Servants had placed themselves along the corners nearest to the group, with drink and snacks on standby. Lining the walls were a mixture of security guards tasked with Decimus, and most striking of all, were the apostles, the blessed elite of the faithful's military, skin bleached white like Bartholomew's and wearing gold and silver-plated armour with built-in lights of violet. Some wore hoods, while others wore full helmets. They all shared similar armour appeal that were adjusted to the frames of their respective races, from Teis to Denasia, and everything in between. This atrium may have the impression of serenity that the ship's namesake is. But inside each of those present was a small fire, surrounded by a fuel needed to burst into an inferno. Eidolon was the biggest fire of them all.
While we're in session, let this be immediately clear. We're here to clean up a mess that our guest here, at his unflinching judgment, has brought.
The Illuminator had his arms wide towards Decimus. The commander found it insulting, but he knew best to bottle it up. His time with serving at the Faithful's behest, he's seen them forget about accords relating to rules of engagement and the basic fundamentals of not acting like a moron. The Illuminator leaned back on his chair and kicked his feet upon the table.
Relax, fellas. A calm mind will see this through.
The others did follow his suit, though Bartholomew, being a giant, four-legged being, walked in a circle before placing himself down on the floor with his legs folded like a dog. Saduj oversaw the table's projector and readied the hologram of the planet to appear before them. It was so large it took half the room, and it overruled the lighting to its glowing turquoise. Despite the relaxed posture of everyone, there was a slight tension in the air. Saduj began the conversation. This here is the planet along with its topography. Thanks to the drones sent out by Bartholomew over the past couple of weeks, we have been able to note key points of interest. I will allow Lord Bartholomew to provide the details. The apprentice to Eidolon pointed to the dots with an extended rod before he collapsed it and placed it on his belt. Bartholomew stood back up and positioned himself at the table to be able to interact with the hologram. Much like handling a smartphone, he dragged it to a place of interest and zoomed in. Well, as we have from our database, from before you left the system, this here is the crash site A, which you investigated and found the first signs of Tiberius. Since the engagements of the Gerahene lords, he has fled. It would be foolish not to, were I in his shoes. But do we know where he went? Inquired Commander Decimus. Simple. Thanks to my drones and orbital surveillance, we've been able to pick him up last week. He's been camping with the natives. Not the likes that you had negotiated with. The Grand Apostle spun the globe and focused on another point of interest, past a mountain range and in a desert. This here is the place. He has been residing there for a week at least. The Illuminator leaned forward and spoke with a grisly tone.
So there you are, my adversary, clutching to whatever civilization you can grab onto. It won't save you. And what are these other points I see here?
This is a long way from Crash Site A and the nearby Obero village that the Gerahene were engaged in. Roughly 50 miles as the dragon flies. This is based on our probes, the capital city of the Obero natives. Have not gotten its local name yet, so we designate this Capital A for the moment. Capital B is designated the camp Tiberius resides at. I ask, what is to be done with the natives, gentlemen? Decimus and Eidolon looked towards each other. Their glances carried along the information they needed to guess their answers. One would be merciful, the other out of their brand of justice. By rank, Eidolon speaks first, as is the custom.
Were it me, They have helped Tiberius wherever he tread. They even led your team to the depths, I hear. 2 men, was it, Commander?
The condescending manner of which the last portion of his remark was sour. Decimus felt not only insulted for his experiences, but even more so on behalf of the 2 brave soldiers who met their end in a heated mistake. That's what he despised about the faithful way of dealing with failure. It was never to be forgiven, and be used as a tool to embarrass, manipulate opinions, and gaslight others into falsehoods, while the loyalists would look at it unbiased and objectively. It is said you need not carry regret when serving the faith. Quite true, the commander thought to himself, for the others would carry it for you, and ready to drop it on your back when you least needed it at a moment's notice. So the commander drank from his cup, while Eidolon continued.
It's simple for me. Either they repent for aiding him.
Decimus slammed his cup onto the desk, breaking it. And if not, the sheer audacity had everyone off guard.
The commander, we suffer not their cooperation, but their servitude.
Slavery, then?
No. Reparations. Justice.
Oh, cut the bullshit, your holiness. What in the universe's grand design does the little fairies have that could threaten you?
I'll forgive your tone, for you know not what they're capable of. Everyone is an enemy unless they either serve or follow you to the ends of the universe. In this blessed galaxy, which our great emperor blessed above all, is to be its master. How stupid must one be as to not accept the divinity of his rule?
Decimus spun his chair to look right to Eidolon in the eye. People who wish to live the way they want, without fear of prosecution. Bartholomew laughed, though Decimus knew he was already speaking out of line. So why relent? Perhaps he was possessed or inspired by some dumb burst of pride. So he continued his onslaughts of words. And you may laugh when you're standing taller than all of us in here, but I must sting to never know what it means to fly by your own set of wings. Yet you stand here living the way you see fit without prosecution. Hypocrisy is a cancer we ill afford to catch. Eidolon's arms tensed to the remark, though Bartholomew lifted his hand and the illuminator relaxed again. The giant moved towards and strode back and forth like a dressage. Come now, Vasquez. We are all hypocrites here. As is our emperor, as is our enemies, as all that live and breathe. We live and die by double standards, for 2 pillars are better than 1. The key is to find the balance between, one side heavier than the others, and they both fall. A single pillar can hold everything, should it be strong enough in its design. As too can one man hold the weight of one world on his shoulders. Do you not have your own world under your rule as a grand apostle? The commander questioned. Yes, and while you have a sound argument, how well does it answer to me if you can't back it up with your actions? What say Vasquez of Aurelia? Think you can beat me? No. So shut up! A voice called out from the opposite end of the table. Can you beat me, O ye mighty? The sheer brash attitude that carried those words robbed all the attention, and the room was lit entirely on that side. But the glowing eyes could not be mistaken, as well as the glistening muscles that could scarcely be seen in the silhouette. Decimus was trembling, though it seemed not because of Bartholomew, but of the new addition to the meeting. Both the Illuminator and Bartholomew were visibly disgusted, because they should have had him included from the start, but hoped he was too busy drinking and partying to notice. So, fellas, what about my argument? Or was I too valuable to consider? A release of gas from a beer can, followed by the footsteps of the red-haired Garuda, came into the light. He was shirtless, wearing sports trainers and shorts, with rings of precious gems and bracelets and necklaces of super rare materials. He was more fitted for a rap music video than a war meeting. But who was to tell him otherwise of the dress code? Eidolon huffed.
Did the order reach you late, Garuda?
Rolling his eyes as the gladiator dragged a chair to the table, unaware it was bolted to the floor from the screeching it made, leaving sparks and scratch marks underneath. Oh, it did, buddy. I just didn't follow it.
Yet here you sit.
Thought I'd swing by, see if the dick measuring contest was still going on, and... oh... Garuda stared at Bartholomew. I think you win by default there, bud. Or is the rumour that you guys are eunuchs true? A shame. I hear the demands for breeding mares right now. Bartholomew snarled and went to grab Garuda's shoulder. To everyone's astonishment, a mere flick of Garuda's finger sent the Grand Apostle sliding across the floor, leaving the same scratch marks that the chair once had. I believe the answer to if you can beat me, my equine friend, is nay. Eidolon stood up, to which Garuda did too. Both stared at one another. Decimus recounted the warnings given to him about tensing up in Garuda's presence and keeping eye contact. But he was dumbfounded that they both glared for well over 10 seconds, whereas he did it for one, and was wobbling like jelly as a result.
Enough of this childish behaviour.
Okay, Grandpa. I'm aware your choir boys start planning their escapes after 30 minutes of being left on their own. They are illegally allowed to after 15 minutes. So I'll just be here on the sideline. Garuda sat down first while Eidolon face-palmed, slowly dragging his hand off his face, knowing how awful the briefing would be with Garuda in the room. Bartholomew shook it off, proceeding back to the hologram. With our forces, we have more than enough to add to this planet, to the records and the Empire at large. As uneventful as it is, there is potential for mining. The natives on one side have recently gone through a form of industrial revolution. Manufacturing has begun acceleration. No signs of factories just yet, but innovation has begun. In terms of their best technology as it stands, telecommunication, propeller-based aircraft, no radar yet, or vertical takeoff or landing vehicles. Garuda let out a mighty belch that echoed across the atrium thrice, cutting Bartholomew off mid-sentence. You really got me hired for this, bruh? He leaned over to Decimus, sloppy in his balance. I hired you for a fight you'd like. These locals are not your concern. Garuda sat back straight. Damn right they're not. I don't pick on those that aren't strong or... Turning his head to face the Illuminator. Humble, and their heads out their asses. He, letting off a smile, while it looked like Eidolon brushed it off. He was far from it. If his skin was bleached like his apostles', it would have turned as red as his skin naturally is. Bartholomew cleared his throat to get the attention back. With your permission, Your Holiness, shall we discuss deployments? Eidolon waved his hand. The apostle spun the globe to capital A's position. We can set up a task force here. The purpose being, if we don't succeed in our first bout with Tiberius, we simply hold them for ransom. He turns himself in, or we torch the place. All but Decimus were impressed, and Garuda was too busy headbanging to tunes in his earpods to care. They were loud enough that Eidolon can hear. It was a form, of rap music or R&B. I have an objection, gentlemen. It brought a sigh of annoyance from Eidolon.
Proceed then.
Now I actually did something similar to this to get his attention. You won't need to follow through with the threat. The eyebrow of Eidolon was raised.
His attention? As in meeting him? So why are you still here?
I appealed to his restraint, sir. Because, quite frankly, I still believe what we're about to do is start a spark in a very dry forest. You was ensuring things went fine outside the Empire while the Daijin Wars took place. But since you know me, the real me, I can tell you from experience and being on the other side that if we just leave him alone here, we can forget about him. Eidolon nodded.
Yes. Sound argument. Bartholomew, I wish to take points for a moment.
You do not need to ask me, your holiness, as you command. The Grand Apostle moved to rest himself to the side, while Eidolon stood to the globe.
Listen well, Vasquez. Sadruj, load up planet Hurjik 5.
With a few taps on his keyboard, the holographic projector switched to a world that had been encompassed by a fortress of rings and shipyards.
Looks beautiful, doesn't it? This was 30 years ago. There was a short conflict between me and the planet. But we came to an armistice and it went fine for 10 years. Since I left them alone to, as you put it, forget about them.
Sadruj typed some more on his keyboard, and this time the planet on display erupted in a flash, and from its centre formed a singularity, sucking in the planet, its moon, and even feeding off the system's central star. The sheer force caused a gamma ray burst, which was tracked and eviscerated 2 Orion Empire held systems, then switching back to the planet they orbited. Eidolon moved his hands across the system softly, like closing the eyes of a fallen soldier.
20 billion. 20 billion souls. Faithful and just eviscerated without warning. Turns out, Vasquez, the very leader of those worlds, held that grudge and preyed on my mercy and made a weapon that caused all that. Killed himself and the others who served him. All because I shown mercy and, as you put it, forgot about him.
He put his arms folded behind him as he strutted towards Decimus.
And so how am I to ensure a guarantee your former king doesn't get ideas of escaping and potentially causing a sequel to that devastation?
The commander had to think, and think harder than ever before. My word, reinforced by the years of knowing him and serving under him. For the sake of the natives and the many who will be lost trying to take him down, I say we just leave this system. Have your drones monitor him if it'll help you sleep at night. If we are to hold a galaxy, then we got to make sure everyone everywhere doesn't cash in on grudges if they see an opportunity. Eidolon was now stood behind Decimus' chair and bearing down on him, placing his hands on the table in front of Decimus and resting his chin at the top of the chair.
So why did you go out your way to bring the galaxy's fiercest mercenary? Hopefully not for a picnic.
2 words came right into Decimus' mind, and they were, oh shit. Had Eidolon finally deciphered the deception? Not only was he cautious of what he would say next, but prayed to whatever might listen that Garuda would remain silent. He wasn't. Well, Mr. Fister, I was brought because he had feelings that you wouldn't listen to him. So he thought it best that we'd engage him with me to avoid the carnage that would ensue. As well as securing the kill, of course. He nonchalantly chugged what was left of the beer can, before crushing it and hurling it to the hologram, going through the icon that represented Tiberius's refuge.
Well thought of then, Vasquez, but I must ask you of this.
Eidolon relaxed himself, leaning on the table.
Are you fine? Knowing you're playing a role in the execution of your former king, who I presume you had to swear all forms of oaths and allegiances and loyalty to his command and his family. Can you truly be ready to bury the past?
Decimus folded his arms and with a grim remark. No. I'd conclude to leaving him alone, monitored so he would never leave this place. Bartholomew, does he seem to be settling down as per your investigation? I cannot lie, and as much as I wish to deliver some violence myself. But yes, it seems he has resided himself to this camp.
Tell that to the families of those Braille, to those that followed and served alongside those Gerahene lords, who carried the centuries of wisdom and combat experience, entire libraries worth of knowledge left with them, and you lost 3. The sheer fact he killed 1 is a cause of concern, but to do 3 is the likes of which I cannot ignore. But I shall compromise. You can be at the capital of those, what are they called?
Obero, sir.
Obero. So all you need to know is the mission was a success. Then you can retire out of conscience or whatever. It matters me not.
And if not, sir, what if doing this provokes a worst-case scenario? The illuminator closed his eyes and breathed calmly, remaining still for what felt like an eternity before he opened his eyes again.
Then the blood is on your hands for allowing him to give life back then. And then Garuda here will get his wish.
Garuda finally sat upright and more professional than he ever was during the meeting, and gleefully imparted his view. Sounds good, but you're implying that I am second in line? Then I am to assume you're heading in? Eidolon turned to Bartholomew.
Grand Apostle Bartholomew, shall we conclude this matter and welcome in another brother to the cause?
The apostle nodded and clasped his hands. Gentlemen, the matter of which is settled. Vasquez shall position his ship and a contingent of 3 of the loyalist frigates to make planetfall outside the capital of the Obero. Should the first attempt fail, ransom will be called for Tiberius to stand down and turn himself in. Garuda will be next to face Tiberius should it all go sour. And if the nightmare scenario that Garuda, for the first time in his life, fail his mission, then it falls to you, my liege, to exert justice. In all favour, say aye. Garuda simply said aye because of the prospect of fighting Tiberius. Eidolon by principle, and Bartholomew because it was primarily his idea, also said aye. Decimus was outdone in the vote, and the plan was to be executed.
And so we shall prepare for Balthasaur's healing and ascension ceremony to the ranks of the faithful. Bartholomew, prepare the sanctum of blessings. We start in 3 hours.
And that concludes Chapter 13. Chapter 14, at the time of this recording, is already written and shall soon be recorded within the week. Stay tuned and thank you for listening.